The room was dazzling with flashes, but beneath the glitter something far greater was unfolding. $15 billion. That number struck like a hammer across the world's headlines. Yet for those who listened closely, it was not just about oil or money. It was about shackles breaking, about a nation once overlooked stepping into history with bold hands. For decades, Burkina Faso had been told it was too small, too weak, too poor to matter. Aid was poured in like sweet poison, dressed as compassion, but binding us tighter to masters in Paris, Washington, and Brussels. Loans carried the weight of chains, not wings. But when Ibrahim Traoré sat across from India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, pen in hand, the map trembled. This was not a deal of dependency. It was a declaration. Oil for technology, energy for modernization, sovereignty for respect. A pact written not in pity but in power. Stay with us, for this is more than a headline. It may be the spark of an anti-colonial Africa. Subscribe and walk with us on this journey. And so the question rises, will this be remembered as a transaction or as the moment Africa began to reclaim its destiny? The ink on the paper carried more weight than any weapon. It was not merely a contract. It was the unveiling of a vision. $15 billion, pledged and planned, written not as debt but as direct investment. To those who dismiss numbers as abstractions, let us break them down. For within these figures lies the architecture of a new future. $4 billion into oil extraction and refining. For the first time, Burkina Faso would not be forced to ship crude under foreign flags, only to buy back refined fuel at inflated prices. Instead, refineries would rise on Burkinabe soil. Every barrel of oil would carry not just energy, but dignity, refined in factories built by African hands. $5 billion into petrochemicals and energy infrastructure. Pipelines would stretch across parched land. Reservoirs and storage tanks would anchor security of supply, and processing plants would roar with the sound of self-reliance. No longer would the nation beg for electricity to light a child's school desk. Power grids and transmission lines would hum with the pulse of a modern society. $3 billion into steel and manufacturing plants. From the red earth would rise mills that shape the skeleton of a future nation. Rails for trains, beams for bridges, machines for agriculture. Forged not in distant continents, but in Ouagadougou, Bobo Dioulasso, and beyond. Jobs would bloom where once only dust and despair lingered. $2 billion into defense technology. Because sovereignty without security is a hollow promise. No longer renting protection at exorbitant cost, Burkina Faso would assemble its own rifles, craft its own vehicles, train its own engineers to build the walls of safety that guard its independence. $1 billion into agriculture, telecommunications, and training programs. For the strength of a nation is not only in its weapons and machines, but in fertile fields and educated minds. From the millet farmer to the young coder, from the welder in Koudougou to the student in Kaya, the ripple of opportunity could spread like rainfall across dry plains. These were not grants. They were not loans with hidden strings. They were investments, foreign direct investments, where India plants its capital into Burkinabe soil, expecting a harvest for both sides. It is a partnership of mutual gain, a wager that Burkina Faso's youth, sweat, and soil are fertile enough to bear fruit for decades to come. Yet a pact of numbers is only as strong as the trust behind it. Investment is never charity. It carries expectations of profit, of leverage, of influence. For every dollar flowing into Ouagadougou, questions rise in markets and households. Will this deal be another hollow promise, ink that dries into dust? Or will the glow of new factories and the hum of power grids transform lives in a way that aid never could? History warns us, too many contracts have been signed under the banners of hope, only to rot under the weight of corruption. Too many billions have disappeared into foreign bank accounts, leaving only bitterness in the hearts of ordinary citizens. This time the stakes are higher. This time the eyes of Africa watch closely, measuring every outcome. In the hands of leaders and laborers alike lies a seed planted in the soil of Burkina Faso, fertilized by capital, watered by sweat, reaching for the sun of independence. Whether that seed becomes a harvest of dignity or a weed of betrayal will depend not only on governments, but on the people who demand accountability. The question that echoes beyond the polished halls of power is not simply about billions. It is the taxi driver in traffic, listening on his radio. It is the farmer in Kaya wondering whether his harvest will be transformed. It is the student coding by candlelight dreaming of electricity. Will these billions turn into power lines, jobs, and schools, or vanish like so many promises before? As the signatures dried beneath the lights, a tremor traveled far beyond Ouagadougou. It was not just a pact, it was a proclamation. Ibrahim Traoré did not whisper. He thundered, "We will not beg, we will bargain. We will not kneel, we will stand." In that moment, the young leader became a symbol larger than himself. In Western capitals, the reaction was sharp. Behind closed doors in Washington, Paris, and Brussels, whispers turned into warnings. Officials muttered of geopolitical instability. Analysts raised alarms about a shift away from traditional partners. What they truly feared was not instability. It was awakening. For decades, Africa had been tethered by aid packages and conditional loans. Now, here was a landlocked nation refusing to play the old script, choosing instead to partner on its own terms. In Beijing, the deal was studied with caution. China had spent billions across Africa, weaving its belt and road through ports and railways. Yet here, India had planted a flag of partnership without debt traps, offering not loans but factories, not pity but power grids. It was a signal that the competition for Africa's future was no longer a one-sided game. For Washington, the tremor struck deepest in finance. Talks of bypassing the dollar, of settling in rupees or francs, challenged the very system through which America projects power. A deal conducted beyond the reach of Western banks hinted at rebellion against a financial empire that had long dictated Africa's choices. In Paris, the echo was more personal. The CFA franc, a colonial relic tying Burkina Faso and its neighbors to French oversight, stood exposed as a shackle. Traoré's speech cut to the bone. Sovereignty could not flourish while currencies remained chained to Paris. The notion that Ouagadougou might seek escape sent shivers through the corridors of the Élysée. At home, the reaction was layered. Crowds in marketplaces debated with cautious hope. A farmer in Kaya asked whether his fields would see new equipment. A welder in Koudougou wondered if he would finally find steady work. A taxi driver in the capital shook his head. Another promise, another headline. Skepticism mixed with pride, doubt intertwined with dignity. For every cheer of sovereignty, there was a quiet murmur of, "Will this truly change my life?" And yet, across Africa, something else stirred. From Bamako to Dakar, from Accra to Nairobi, voices whispered of possibility. If Burkina Faso could sign such a pact, why not others? Could this be the first crack in the wall of dependency? Could sovereignty, once dismissed as a dream, spread like wildfire across the continent? This was the high point, the emotional summit. The young soldier president, standing with Narendra Modi, was not only signing for his nation, he was, intentionally or not, igniting the imagination of a continent. To the West, it was a challenge. To Africa, it was a signal. But with every summit comes a descent. Investment is not neutral. India, too, seeks its energy, its security, its sphere of influence. Will the balance remain equal? Or will Ouagadougou find itself entangled in rivalries between India, China, and the West? Will the promise of factories and grids come to life, or collapse into enclaves owned by foreign bosses? The stage was set. The cameras captured applause. The speeches painted grandeur. But history does not judge by signatures. It judges by results. Has Traoré lit the torch of a new era? Or has he stepped into a storm that may consume the very sovereignty he defends? The signature may have been written in a grand hall, but its true weight will be measured in the lives of ordinary people. For every dollar pledged, there is a face waiting in Ouagadougou, in Kaya, in Koudougou, in Bobo Dioulasso. They are not watching balance sheets. They are watching their homes, their markets, their futures. If the pact holds, the consequences could be transformative. Power plants funded through this deal could push electricity into villages that have long lived by candlelight. A child who once bent over a book in the dim glow of kerosene could instead study under the steady shine of a light bulb powered by his nation's own oil. That is not just energy. That is dignity translated into daily life. Factories could sprout along dusty roads, offering jobs where once there was only unemployment. Welders, engineers, drivers, and farmers could see wages flow steadily, not sporadically. Modern equipment could transform the harvests of millet and sorghum, lifting farmers from subsistence to surplus. Telecommunications towers could rise, connecting remote communities to a digital world that had long ignored them. In such a scenario, sovereignty would not be an abstract word, but a lived experience. Politically, the Pact could alter the very rhythm of Burkina Faso's governance. For too long, leaders across the continent have been shackled by dependence, spending hours negotiating aid packages, bowing to conditions from Washington or Brussels, adjusting budgets not to serve citizens, but to appease creditors. If this agreement truly delivers, it could empower a government to shape policy around its people rather than around foreign approval. Yet the risks are as real as the hopes. History is a graveyard filled with failed promises. Too often, billions pledged to Africa have vanished into corruption, bureaucracy, and the accounts of elites. Factories stand half-built, machinery rusts, and ordinary citizens see little but headlines. If the same fate awaits here, the disappointment will be deeper than ever. For this is not simply about contracts, it is about trust. Civil society knows this. Already, voices in markets and unions warn, vigilance is the price of sovereignty. If officials divert funds, if contracts remain hidden, if foreign corporations dominate without transferring skills, the Pact will crumble into betrayal. A young student coding in a dusty classroom does not dream of dependency. He dreams of freedom. If his dream is stolen again, anger will not be silent. Security adds another layer of tension. Burkina Faso bleeds daily from insurgency and terrorism. Investments in defense may strengthen capacity, but if governance remains fragile, the enemy within can exploit disappointment. Factories alone do not silence guns. Electricity grids do not erase insurgencies. Sovereignty must be defended both with rifles and with trust in government. And then comes the continental weight. Africa is watching. Leaders from Senegal, Ghana, Mali, and Côte d'Ivoire observe closely, asking themselves whether Burkina Faso can succeed where others stumbled. If Ouagadougou proves that billions can translate into real sovereignty, it may embolden neighbors to walk the same path. But if the Pact collapses into corruption, it will reinforce the cynicism that Africa cannot govern itself. This is why the stakes extend beyond borders. A victory for Burkina Faso is a victory for an anti-colonial Africa. A failure is ammunition for those who wish to keep the continent in chains. The soil is ready, the seed has been planted. But who will guard the harvest? That is the question echoing in every village, every school, every field. Will the lived reality of citizens match the lofty promises, or will history add another stone to the graveyard of African dreams? Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the tremors of this pact have stirred debates in every capital that claims a stake in Africa's future. To some, it is a bold experiment. To others, it is a provocation. But no one can deny, the world is watching. For India, the agreement is both pragmatic and symbolic. Pragmatic, because its economy hungers for energy to sustain rapid growth. Symbolic, because it signals that New Delhi is no longer content to let Beijing dominate African partnerships. Where China has often been accused of loans that bind, India presents itself as a partner that builds factories, grids, and industries. Whether this narrative holds in practice remains to be seen, but the messaging is clear. India seeks to craft a new axis, one that stretches not only across oceans, but across imaginations. For the West, the anxiety is sharper. Washington sees more than oil barrels. It sees a challenge to the supremacy of the dollar. Talks of transactions in rupees or alternative currencies shake the foundation of a system that underpins American influence. To bypass Western banks is not simply an economic choice. It is rebellion. It is sovereignty asserted in numbers. In Paris, the wound cuts deeper. The CFA franc, long denounced as a colonial shackle, becomes ever harder to defend when leaders like Traoré call it out directly. If Ouagadougou pursues currency autonomy, France risks watching its most enduring lever of control crumble. The symbolism of an African nation demanding liberation not only from aid, but from monetary chains rattles the Élysée. Regional bodies tread cautiously. The African Union speaks of opportunity. ECOWAS measures stability against disruption. Some see Burkina Faso's move as inspiration, others as recklessness. Yet beneath the cautious communiques lies an undeniable truth. One small nation has forced a continent to re-examine its own posture toward power and partnership. This is the essence of African sovereignty, not granted, not gifted, but seized through risk and resolve. Burkina Faso's pact with India is not merely a deal, it is a declaration to the world. Africa chooses its partners, Africa writes its terms, Africa charts its course, and so the question lingers like a storm on the horizon. Is this pact the spark of a continental awakening? Or will it ignite rivalries that test the very fabric of Africa's fragile alliances? The ink is dry, the cameras are gone, but the real story has only begun. Every great gamble carries two futures, one bright with possibility, one dark with disappointment. Which path Burkina Faso walks will depend not on destiny, but on discipline. In the best case, the pact becomes the backbone of transformation. Factories rise from the soil, not as hollow shells, but as humming engines of employment. Engineers trained through Indian programs design the rails and machines of tomorrow. Oil revenues stabilize the economy, no longer siphoned abroad, but invested in schools, hospitals, and roads. Electricity flows steadily into villages, and farmers use modern tools to double their harvests. In this vision, Burkina Faso becomes more than a landlocked nation. It becomes a bridge between Africa and Asia, a hub of innovation and trade. But the darker path lurks close. Contracts mismanaged, funds siphoned, factories dominated by foreign bosses, while locals remain mere laborers. Technology transfer written in ink but absent in reality. Profits flowing outward while resentment grows inward. Corruption creeping like poison through every promise. If that future takes root, the pact will become yet another tombstone in the graveyard of African dreams. And the cynics will laugh. See, Africa cannot govern itself. The truth is, neither future is guaranteed. Both are possible. The deciding force will not only be the government in Ouagadougou, but the vigilance of the Burkinabe people. Civil society must demand transparency. Workers must insist on fair wages. Farmers must hold leaders accountable for promises. Sovereignty is not a gift to be signed on paper. It is a discipline to be defended every day. For Africa, the stakes are continental. If Burkina Faso succeeds, others will follow. Leaders in Senegal, Ghana, Mali, and Nigeria will look to Ouagadougou and say, if they could, so can we. The map of power will begin to tilt, not drawn in Washington or Beijing, but in African capitals. If Burkina Faso fails, however, it will not fall alone. The failure will be wielded as proof that Africa must remain in chains. The seed has been planted. The question is whether the soil is strong enough, whether the harvest will be of dignity or of despair. History waits, pen poised, and the cliffhanger stands. Will Burkina Faso walk toward light or stumble once more into shadow? When Ibrahim Traoré placed his signature beside Narendra Modi's, he was not only signing a contract, he was writing a wager against history itself. For too long, the story of Africa has been written in Paris, in Washington, in London. Too long, the soil has been mined while its people were left with crumbs. Too long, dignity was bartered for aid dressed as kindness but chained with conditions. This pact is different. It is oil, yes, but also factories, jobs, power grids, training programs, and defense production. It is an architecture of sovereignty, a blueprint for dignity, a seed planted in the red earth of Burkina Faso. Whether it grows into a harvest of pride or withers into betrayal will depend not on fate, but on vigilance. For Africa, the echoes stretch far beyond Ouagadougou. If one small nation dares to risk, what stops the rest? If Burkina Faso can choose trade over aid, dignity over dependency, what excuse remains for others to kneel? The stakes are continental, the implications global. This is not simply Burkina Faso rising, it is the shadow of an anti-colonial Africa spreading across the horizon. And yet sovereignty is never given once and for all. It must be renewed, defended, nourished. Leaders may sign papers, but only people can make them real. 5 years from now, the world will look back and ask, was this pact a turning point or another broken dream? The world may whisper doubts, enemies may plot sabotage, challenges will surely come. But the soil has been seeded, and the harvest depends on hands that are disciplined, united, and unyielding. So the question remains, will history remember this as a mere transaction, or as the dawn of African sovereignty? If this vision resonates with you, do not walk away. Subscribe, share, and stand with us as we follow this story, because the fire of a new Africa is only beginning to burn.